from anti-choice narrative session. We've got a really great panel, and we'll go to 8 o'clock. So please, yeah. So I'm going to chair. I'm Kerry Abel, and I'm the chair of abortion rights and the chair of this meeting tonight. I'm really pleased that we've got a good lineup for you. So I want them to be the experts and sort of talk about their angle on anti-choice narratives. We will have the speakers speak for about 3 to 5 minutes each, and then we'll open it up to questions. So please put your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll intermittently put some links up as well. But please join in with the discussion. That should be about half of the session, and I think we'll you know, we've got people with some really with a lot of experience of campaigning and some really good knowledge on this, so I'm looking forward to it. I think that anti-choice activity takes a variety of guises, and it regularly morphs, and it is something as a campaign, as an abortion rights campaign, we always have to be on top of. I think the various kind of experiences of anti-choice narratives have been where they encourage shame and stigma of abortion, so it has a sort of chilling effect. They regularly peddle misinformation or stop information channels completely, like the sort of strategy in the student movement of stopping anyone really talking about it. They're not beyond co-opting feminism or disabled activism, and they try and legally push time limits or various kind of sex selection motions, cooling off periods that have the effect of inferring that women aren't to be trusted. But also sometimes in recent years, they've kind of given up trying to change the minds of people in the media and to take action in Parliament, because they know they can't get it through. So they've in my view, sort of pushed the most disgusting activism and started whispering in women's ear and grabbing their cuffs at clinics. And we've seen the rise of anti-choice clinic activism. So we've got people to talk about all of those things here. I think that we should kick off with Polly Jackson, who's been around campaigning in different ways. She's a campaigning lawyer with a particular interest in reproductive justice and the way that law is used to govern women's bodies. She divides her time between working for the Good Law Project and running private children law cases, and being a very proud member of the steering group of both the London Irish Abortion Rights Campaign and Sister Supporter, and we're really glad to have her. Polly, if you want to kick off.
Thanks, Kerry. Yeah, so that was a lovely introduction. But for today, I'll be talking about my work with Sister Supporter. And Sister Supporter is a grassroots organisation based in London that's fully made up of volunteers. And essentially, we campaign for buffer zones, or what are also called safe zones, outside abortion clinics. And our story is that we were formed in the winter of 2015 when our founder Anna came home from university and was so enraged by seeing these anti-choice groups congregating outside the big abortion clinic near to where her family lived, that she decided to take action. She put an ad in a local newspaper thinking, you know, a few people would turn up, and inviting people to come to a counter vigil. And actually a huge number of people showed up, and I think it really showed the depth of feeling in the local community that so many people came and then kept coming back every weekend through rain and snow, literally, to offer protection to the service users that were accessing the clinic. And so that's kind of how we were formed, and we went through, you know, it's a really grassroots organisation, so we went through kind of a number of permutations of working out what we should do. Should we just be witnessing what's happening? Should we be trying to protect the women and pregnant people accessing the clinic? Should we be contacting the police? What should we be doing? And it was really quite an organic progression. And at first we were holding counter vigils, and we would go every every Saturday morning, and we got these great fluorescent vests from the Clinic Vest Project in the States, and a big shout out to them because they're a great organisation, and they provide free vests for people that are doing sort of pro-choice campaigning. And we kind of eventually got in the habit of standing in a line and kind of shielding service users from anti-choice vigilers, and we would have our back to the clinic to be kind of as unobtrusive as possible, because it kind of felt like we didn't want to be unhelpful by blocking the clinic in any way, or kind of entering into like any conflict with the anti-choice protesters. And after doing that for a few months, we started being visited by a wonderful academic called Pam Lowe, who you'll be hearing from in a minute, who researches women's reproductive and sexual health at Aston University. And she said, I think it might be possible to ask the council to put a buffer zone in place, making use of anti-social behaviour legislation. And so that kind of spurred us on, and we looked into the mechanics of getting the council to actually utilise the legislation it could, and to put what's called a public space protection order in place, and took it from there. And it took us about 2 years to get that. But we got the first buffer zone in the UK outside of that clinic in Ealing. And since then, we've kind of got a few sister supporter franchises, and we've been campaigning to ask councils to use the powers at their disposal. So there's another buffer zone in Richmond, in West London, one in Manchester, and we've got a few others kind of bubbling along that's ongoing. So we're hoping to get more PSPOs to protect as many people as, sorry, I live on the Pentonville Road in central London, and it's really, really loud. So we're hoping to continue that and to get more PSPOs, but obviously the wider issue is the need for there to be national legislation to protect women and pregnant people accessing clinics, because at the moment there's a postcode lottery. You know, it depends how active and involved your council is as to whether you'll be protected when you're accessing a clinic in your local area, or even when you're just walking past, because often anti-choice protesters don't know who's going to the clinic or who's not, so they'll just speak to and grab and harass, etc., which I'm sure we'll go into later, the kinds of tactics that they use, anyone that passes. So it affects children, it affects just people in the local area, and obviously the worst is the service users and staff that are attending the clinic.
Okay, well, I was the first one to mute myself. Yeah, thanks very much, Polly. I definitely think we can go into that through this evening. So please do feed in your questions and your points. The next person we've got to speak to you, and Polly helpfully kind of segued the introduction, is Dr. Pam Lowe. Pam is an academic and senior researcher at Aston University, and most of her time is spent teaching and researching around women's reproductive and sexual health, with a particular interest in pregnancy, pregnancy, abortions, and early parenting. She's currently working on a long-term ethnographic study of abortion debates in public spaces, and spends a lot of time interviewing aunties and monitoring their actions. So Pam, are you okay? Can you hear me? Are you okay to put your camera on? Yeah. Hi.
Yep.
Hi.
Hi. Yep, I'm ready to go. And thank you for that introduction, and thank you for the shout out, Polly. It was great to work with Sister Supporter. So yes, I've been researching anti-abortion activism, particularly in public spaces, for about 5 years ago. And we have evidence and understanding to support both local and national campaigns in terms of getting buffer zones. Hopefully that will work. But what I also, as Polly spent a lot of time talking about what happens outside clinics, I think what I will talk about a little bit more is about some of the discourses they use. It's important to note that anti-abortion, they play a long game. So I'll give you an example of that. In the 1980s in the US, the Christian right set up law schools, their own private law schools, in order to train Christian lawyers to become judges in 20 or 30 years down the line. So you are talking about a systematic campaign over a long period of time. And they are, they look to influence all sorts of things. Although not a law school itself, but you know, the Alliance Defending Freedom, ADF, we now have a branch in London, offers summer schools and internships for Christian lawyers, and they are now playing an influence in terms of the law and challenging cases around abortion and various other issues in the UK. So we need to think about the anti-choice, and there's sort of three branches of them. So you have the advocacy, which is obviously the lobbying in Parliament and bringing cases. You also got the crisis pregnancy services, and also importantly post-abortion services, because what's emerging is actually that the post-abortion services is where they do a lot of recruitment for people to then stand outside clinics and do other sorts of activities. And then you've got the public activism, and they are all interrelated. But importantly, one of the things that's happened over the 5 years that we're converging together, and they're working together much more, whereas they used to quite often not talk to each other. And that's important as well, because it was the convergence of the evangelicals and the Catholics in the US that actually sort of then boosted the Christian right there. Let's be very pro-choice. Most people of faith are pro-choice, but of the people who are against abortion, most of them are very religious, and they have very specific religious views, and so they think being against abortion and the work they do against abortion, they're on a divine mission. And that makes it incredibly difficult to challenge them. And in some ways, it's not even going to work challenging them. So what I think we need to pay attention to is the way they go about campaigning in public spaces, and particularly the messages, and how to counteract them. So two of the big trends that we're seeing in terms of the way that they put their messages together, how science shows that abortion is wrong, because life is from conception, but also they're increasingly using human rights to try and justify an anti-abortion position. And again, that's something which is, it's not new. Some of these claims to science and human rights go back to the 1960s, but what they're doing increasingly is putting out these public messages and really running it almost like an election campaign. So we've started to see groups, you know, posting leaflets through people's letterboxes, for example, in different places. Milton Keynes was one recently, and really upping their game in terms of the way that they're campaigning and selling a message which is not true, but actually is, as Kerry mentioned earlier, you know, claiming around feminism, claiming around, you know, they're supporting disability rights when they're actually doing the opposite. So what there's two kind of justifications for this. So one of their tactics is to try and restrict abortion piece by piece. So that's, you know, continually decrease the legal access to abortion we have. So far, the pro-choice community, including and playing a pivotal role in abortion rights, has stopped every single time they have tried to do a piece-by-piece change to the law. But the other thing they try and do is try and make abortion unaccessible or less accessible. And right at the minute, there is a massive, massive campaign against pills by post. So for reasons that none of us can fathom, you know, both Wales, Scotland and England decided to do a public consultation on pills by post and not look at the clinical evidence, first of all. Why they would do that, who knows, because they wouldn't put any other medical treatment out for public consultation. And the Antis had a massive, massive writing campaign. And we've seen the numbers in Scotland, and now they're publicising that, you know, 4,000 people don't want pills by post in Scotland. But actually, these are not service users. These are just, you know, the entirety of the anti-abortion population of the UK and beyond writing in. And I think that that's one of our biggest challenges, is that we have the majority of view, but we can't necessarily get people on our side to turn out and say that, because they don't think that abortion is under threat. So I will stop there, I think.
Oh, thank you. I was just going to say that abortion rights was was a merger of two organisations that you know, we're on the shoulders of giants, really. And we were merged 18 years ago. It's going to be our 18th birthday this year, and we're going to have a party in September. But the important thing is the sort of styles of how we campaign. So the Abortion Law Reform Association was set up in the 1930s and was fundamental to getting the legislation in 1967, and is very good at lobbying parliamentarians and letter writing and that kind of very worthwhile legal and political campaigning. And then when we got the law and the backlash to the Abortion Act started in the 70s, a more kind of grassroots street level campaign, the National Abortion Campaign, was set up to do more direct action, and we're a merger of both traditions, so we kind of span the gamut of that. I'm really pleased to bring in Davinia Hamilton. So she is our abortion rights secretary. She's a former writer and reproductive rights activist, and she also works for she works on campaigns for abortion rights and putting together events. And in her performer role, she is writing a play about the abortion ban in Malta, so she's well versed in all of the issues there. So I'll bring in Davinia.
Thank you for the introduction, Kerry. Yes, so as Kerry said, I am currently co-developing a play about the abortion ban in Malta, which is where I'm from. And the play doesn't focus on the anti-choice movement in the country because they get more than enough airtime already as it is. But inevitably, anti-choice narratives show up in most of the interviews that we've conducted while we were doing our research with people who've had abortions, with activists, and with interested parties. A few weeks ago in Malta, Marlene Farrugia, who's an independent MP, presented a bill to decriminalize abortion. Now, legally, nothing's happened as a result of this, but there has been a really loud anti-choice response. And I want to look at some of the arguments that have been emerging as part of this response, because I think it's really interesting to see how the tactics in Malta are the same as the tactics in the US, as the tactics in the UK, as the tactics in Italy, and everywhere else. There's a kind of a hegemonical structure to the strategies that are put in place by the antis. So Miriam Shiba-Ross, who's the chairperson of the Life Network Foundation, who I'll talk more about later, said, "The decriminalization of abortion is a smokescreen to introduce abortion right up until birth in Malta," which is an argument that's gaining a lot of ground. You get people saying, so does this mean we're going to have a situation where, you know, the day before they're due to give birth, women just decide to have an abortion, just the day before, you know? And this plays on the antis' fantasy of abortions being like these capricious acts that are being carried out by irresponsible women who won't submit to the consequences of the sinful lifestyles they're leading. And the line that gets doled out again and again is, she should have kept her legs shut if she didn't want a baby. And this speaks to like a culture of sexual repression and a place where conservative Catholic morals and ideals still have major influence over people's everyday lives. That's a reality where I'm from. The Life Network, who I mentioned earlier, is affiliated, if you look into them, with Agenda Europe, which is a network of conservative and religious campaigners from the US and Europe with a mission to roll back rights for sexual and reproductive health in Europe. And last year, they received a huge grant from the Maltese government to counsel pregnant women. Now, the counseling that they provide is questionable at best. If you go on their website, it's littered with false medical information, stuff about abortion reversal pills and how the morning after pill is actually an abortifacient. But more sinister than that, in 2019, concerns were raised by ASN, BPAS, and Voice for Choice Malta that rogue crisis pregnancy centers in Malta were intimidating people who called them in crisis, and also impersonating abortion services, you know, pretending to be abortion providers and then delaying the abortions until the time limit was up. So then the women had no choice at all. They couldn't travel then. They also shared women's contact details with anti-abortion groups in Ireland. They sent abusive text messages, and some of them even visited these women at their home addresses to intimidate and harass them. So this is really like sinister stuff. This isn't just, you know, ideology. This is affecting people in the street, in their homes. As Kerry said, we see antis co-opting feminism. One of the arguments against the decrim bill was if we really cared about women, we'd let them be born, which is it's a clever strategy because obviously globally feminism is gaining ground. That's not to be denied. So the antis can't be seen to be anti-woman. But the problem here lies with the fact that their definition of womanhood, when they're talking about being pro-woman, is very narrow. They're celebrating women who occupy traditional gender roles, who aspire to motherhood or to dedicating themselves to the family. But everybody who doesn't fall under that umbrella, that category, migrant women, trans women, sex workers, women living in poverty, women who just don't want children, they're happy to see them, shamed and punished. And shame and stigma are very, very effective tactics. And many of the people that we spoke to when we were researching our play who had abortion said that they hadn't told anyone about the abortion they had. There was a woman that we had who had an abortion 50 years ago and only told her partner the night before our interview for the first time because she was so afraid of the repercussions. And so this tactic doesn't stop abortion from happening, but it does cut the person off from all their support networks, make them feel completely isolated. And people in Malta who've had abortions don't realize there are thousands of others who've done the same. A conservative estimate is that 400 Maltese women and pregnant people per year access abortion either online or by traveling. And when you consider the population is 400,000, 400 a year is considerable. So that's Malta. And then I want to look really, really briefly, we can talk about this in more detail, at Italy. So Malta is like the worst case scenario because abortion is banned outright. But in Italy, they're showing us that it's not enough to have abortion legally available. Italy has, abortion is legally protected, but there are some of the worst barriers to access, the longest waiting period in Europe, requirement of multiple medical appointments, mandatory counseling, and 69% of doctors are conscientious objectors. So access is really limited. And in fact, in 2016, Italy had their own version of Savita. They had a woman called Valentina Meluzzo who died of septicemia because she was refused a termination at 19 weeks by a doctor who was invoking the conscience clause. And we've also seen in Italy, a story last year where aunties have been burying fetuses in graves that are marked with the names of the women who had the abortion without their consent. So this is a massive breach of privacy. And it deters women who are like, well, if I have an abortion, then I could be outed. And if you have a culture where abortion is still stigmatized, then that might mean losing your family, losing your job, losing your friends. So yeah, I think it's really essential that we understand these tactics that are being employed, especially as a pro-choice campaigning group, because we need to be able to not only respond but preempt them so that the blows don't land quite so heavily. I'll stop there, but we can continue talking about all of this stuff.
Sure, yes, we will. So could you just say what your play is called?
Working title is Blue. That might change, but currently it's Blue.
So I saw very early kind of drafts of the play, some short pieces that the two writers performed, and I think I cried. I think it was pretty powerful. So look out for that.
Thank you.
I've had one question, which is a comment, and Polly answered it, but I think I'm going to read it out anyway, because I'm not entirely sure who can see all of the questions. But it's from Janet Mearns, who lives in Ealing, who was sort of passing on that the counsellors were impressed by all of the information provided about pregnant people's experiences outside their clinic. And Polly, do you just want to give your response? Because I think it's quite important for sort of other things coming up.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, obviously it's really good to hear that counsellors were impressed with the work that Sister Supporter did primarily, and we did do a huge amount of work before we had the first PSPO, but then also at the renewal hearing, which was really recent. And the issue with PSPOs is that one of the many issues with them is that they only last for 3 years, which means that basically the onus is on a group of volunteers to continually gather evidence and have it ready to say why this needs to continue. So it's just by no means a proper or long-term solution to the problem. And if I'm very happy to do the work. I think it's a harm reduction measure that's very, very necessary, and I know that we have that our work and that the work of Ealing Council and, you know, all of the people that live there and that have contributed has been really helpful and has prevented a lot of women and pregnant people from being harassed and intimidated. But it's like the onus has been shifted, you know, from central government, from the council, onto people that care in the local community, and I just think that's, you know, not really where it should be. So that's one of the problems with PSPO, but, you know, we'll carry on until we get national legislation, nevertheless.
Can I also add there is that one of the things, the other issues about PSPOs is that they're very location specific. So if you have a council area where, you know, there are multiple abortion clinics, you can, but they're only outstanding outside one of them, you can only gather evidence of that one, and then it's very difficult to bring in a PSPO to protect the others, but the aunties can then just move on to the next one.
Yeah,
so
I mean, that happens across London. They all just left Ealing and went to central London. You know, why wouldn't you? Makes sense.
So some councils are understandably reluctant to spend an awful lot of money bringing in a PSPO, which is going to effectively have very little impact, because it will still just move the problem to the next clinic in their local area.
Yeah, thank you. So please put your questions in the Q&A box. I think that we'll have a really good discussion. So so Nandini Archer from Open Democracy was supposed to be on the panel, but she had to give her apologies. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the news that she broke about this strategy from the US to advertise abortion reversal pills, and essentially sort of taking progesterone to after the first pill's been taken, which which we called in our press release quackery, because I think it is very misleading medical information, and there is an investigation into the doctors who the organisations say are willing to prescribe it, because we think it's very questionable. So there is SPUC, the Society for the Protection of the Unborn Child, were advertising a sort of extra page, a microsite from their own site that had a US telephone number that they said you could call, internet call, and there was a sort of chat bot on the end, which I think that they were trying to sort of mimic the way that the abortion providers here are trying to reach out and access, help women access through telemedicine their own abortions. But we obviously had a go and saw it, sort of tested it out, and no one did actually get back within the time necessary to contact us. That, you know, we had somebody on the end of the line trying to chat to us, but we never got in touch with the doctor. So I think it's propaganda, and you know, it's subject to sort of further investigation. But I note that there was a parliamentary meeting about it. So Parliament is sort of hosting these doctors to talk to them, and I think that we should be worried about this narrative. I think that, you know, women regret their abortions. And also that they can be undone, like, you know, you just have to ring up an anti-choice group. I think that that's probably, I don't really think they're doing it to actually reverse abortions. I think they're doing it to try and get in the way of those discussions with individuals. So it's very similar to sort of clinic protests. I wanted to ask my own question, if that's okay, to everyone on the panel, because I think that unfortunately, you know, we exist for the pro-choice majority. We exist to ensure that we have good quality access, that it's free, that it's safe, that it's local, that it's legal. And I unfortunately think we might always have to do that, because there will always be a small minority of anti-choice, an anti-choice contingent that exists. They seem to always be able to find some money, sometimes quite well funded. And I'm very, very certain, I've been doing this for a while, I'm very certain that it isn't about the fetuses. I'm really clear that it's about controlling women, especially working class women, and keeping us in our place and using forced pregnancy as punishment. So I think that we always need to be on on guard to anti-choice narratives. And I said at the beginning, they often sort of switch and morph and become, and use, I think they've been kind of quoted as saying we need to use feminist arguments against them. So I just wanted to ask a question. I'm going to ask it to Pam first, but in terms of, I think it's very important to note these narratives, not just because of the harm reduction and the things that are in our face at the moment, but also in terms of how we run our campaign. So I wanted to ask a question about how we preempt the antis narratives and how we make it hurt our campaign less. What are the sort of main strategies that we should employ, that we should learn? Because I think this session is called How Do We Learn? So Pam, do you mind coming in on that first?
Oh, good question. So while I think about what there is to learn, I will just say is actually they are actually handing the pills out in places in the UK, and those leaflets outside the abortion clinic in Birmingham, or one of the abortion clinics, they actually try and give the leaflets to people as they're leaving. So it is quite a big deal. And one of the doctors who was prescribing was in Birmingham, but they're currently suspended. What can we learn? I think what the antis are very good at is their messaging, right? They are very good at messaging and they're very good at mobilizing. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we face is that, well, first of all, most people don't know abortion is still a crime in England, Scotland and Wales, although Scotland is slightly different legal system, but it is still a crime, so it's a different law. And I think that is part of our problem, that because people don't know what the situation is, it becomes very difficult to mobilize our support. And they are very good at getting messages where, like the abortion up till birth that has just been mentioned, is the fact that to counteract that, it's complicated, right? Why? It's not that anyone's going to change their mind just before they give birth, but actually we need abortion to be lawful throughout all periods in pregnancy, because in an obstetric emergency, which can happen at any time, the emphasis needs to be on no legal protection just for the fetus, because then you've got a problem in terms of, as a clinician, making a judgment. I mean, all clinicians would try and save both, but if they can't, then you don't want one which is criminalised and one which isn't. So I think it's about the messaging, and I think it's about, I mean, to some extent, we have to be both reactive and proactive. So I think we need to be much more proactive about making sure that people are aware that abortion is a crime, aware what we mean by decriminalisation, which is not the same as deregulation, but also, try and counteract some of the narratives, and to some extent, they're particularly very good at things like, at getting memes and things like that circulating on social media, because they've got a big tranche. The other thing which is interesting, and again, there was a big report that's just come out, which is from the EU, was looking at tracking the money, and I called Tip of the Iceberg, and I think anyone who's interested in the antis, it's well worth a read of that. I'll try and find the link and put it in the chat before we finish. And one of the things that study revealed, and this is looking at the global movement of anti-abortion movements, is the fact that actually there are a lot of the money is EU based and actually not necessarily coming. But one of the big things is that selling Catholic, I mean, to be honest, it's tat. I mean, small plasticky miraculous medals and pink and blue rosary beads, those baby colours and various that they use outside clinics. Actually, that is a revenue generator. It's a revenue generator. And in fact, apparently they have actually just started opening another factory to sell this, and this is funding them. And the other thing which they do, which I'm not entirely sure how they get around in GDPR, is they do an awful lot of petitions through Citizens Go. And again, what they do is they do the petitions and they harvest names and addresses. So then when they need to pat people up for money, or they need to get lots of people to write in and protest about pills by post, they have a huge data bank of names and addresses. So I think that some of those tactics, which are not, anti-specific, anyone who's involved in, campaigning on all sorts of issues from party politics to, to various other things, will recognise that actually data is key, and actually having, getting data and keeping data with permission, obviously, is really important, because it's a way to mobilise the membership and mobilise your supporters. So yeah, I'll stop there because I've probably gone on for too long.
Stav, are you okay to come in next?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of what I'm going to say is going to echo some of what Pam's just said, and I'm also hoping to address Audrey's comment in the Q&A as part of my answer, because Audrey's saying, the anti-choice feedback into the telemedicine consultations raised concerns about safeguarding with remote consultation, and then the doctors providing so-called abortion reversal pills provided by remote consultation. So we have the hypocrisy there. And I think it's interesting to note how the antis claim the moral high ground. That's one of their kind of main positions, isn't it? We have the moral high ground because, we're doing God's work or whatever it is. And to a certain extent, I think we give that to them. I think that we don't really question that, but they've hijacked the moral high ground and they're operating in a completely immoral way. I mean, they are not above lying, cheating, harassing, intimidating, being hypocrites, using double standards. And I really think that it's important that we try to reclaim that, that some of that ground for ourselves, because, we can make that argument for ourselves. And also, yeah, with regard to obstetric emergencies, this is the thing, isn't it, with the argument about, the day before birth, is she going to decide to have an abortion? It's a very all or nothing view. Like, it doesn't take into account all of the different shades of reasons that one might need to have an abortion, but it's kind of serving to drive home this morbid fantasy of baby killers. And slightly on a tangent, I mean, I grew up in a very anti-choice country. Like, I was exposed to propaganda throughout my education, and one of the ways that they did this was in religion classes. We had a class once about, I can't remember her name, this Italian woman who chose to die so that her unborn child could live, and she was made a saint. And we had to write essays about her and do comprehensions about how saintly she is and how we must aspire to be like her. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. I also think it's interesting that a couple of years ago, there was an article that revealed that there was a trend recently for women to track their periods on an app. And instead of using like condoms or birth control pills, use the rhythm method based on the data on this app. But then if you look into who was funding that, the anti-abortion lobby was giving money to these app developers. If this isn't an underhanded sort of hypocritical thing, I don't know what is. I think also there's two other things I want to talk about briefly. The first one is, I agree that the abortion reversal pills, I don't think it is about providing abortion reversal pills. In fact, wasn't it that one of the studies, the clinical trials, had to be stopped because they were deemed to be so dangerous and people were hemorrhaging from them? It would be madness to prescribe those to actual people. But it is to create a narrative that they can then use to lobby politicians. And this narrative is one around regret. And I think I've spoken about this before in our AGM and in our meetings, but it's just, we can't let them have a monopoly over the idea of regret. I mean, if we want to be the movement, a movement for solidarity and for human empathy, we need to be able to stand in solidarity with all facets of the experience. And sometimes regret is one of those facets. We can't let the antis take that, because that's how they get them. And finally, I think I was speaking to my colleague Elisa earlier, and she made a really good point about how, you know, our campaigns need to be a sort of a pincer movement. So yes, you need to campaign for decriminalization. Yes, you need to campaign to end stigma. Yes, you need to campaign for all of those kind of things. But you also, more importantly, almost need to campaign to make sure that materially, practically, people have real, true access, not just a postcode lottery, not just, you know, in the law, because places like Italy and Poland show us how easy it is for that access to be lost.
Yeah, thank you. Polly, if you can remember the question.
Yeah. I mean, so I guess I think that there are the three things that the anti-choice lot have got in abundance that maybe we don't have, which is money, branding, and they're buying into a misogynist narrative that already exists. So they're essentially, you know, they're not going against anything that isn't already kind of pretty well part of our culture already. So all they need to do is just add things on top and tap into that. They're, you know, obviously they're incredibly well funded. So like, for example, there's a campaign group called Be Here For Me, which was set up kind of immediately in reaction to what was happening in Ealing, in between the time where we started asking for the PSPO when we got it. And they nicked our branding, Sister Supporter branding. They look exactly the same as what we as we do, same colors and same kind of font and everything. And they got, you know, I mean, that's a very small amount of money compared to like lots of campaigns, but they managed to get banners and you know, signs and to bus people in. And so they've got money to pay people to go and stand outside clinics. They've got money to like pay for advertising on Google. Google accepts that money and like puts crisis pregnancy centers at the top. So, you know, in all those ways, all money is power basically. So they're using that. And then also their messaging is brilliant. Like their branding is phenomenal. They, you know, obviously I don't agree with anything that they say at any point, but nonetheless, it's that, you know, yeah, women are stupid, women are just having abortions, like they'll have one the day before they're due to give birth if they can do. Change your life, it's your lifestyle that's the problem, etc., etc. So, and those sound bites, the pictures of the little baby, the picture of, you know, a fetus, the graphic image of an allegedly aborted fetus, pictures of children playing and, you know, women laughing at salad or whatever they use, is powerful, and it also kind of fits with culturally sort of where this country pretty much is, despite the vast number of women and you know, all people that are very feminist and support women and pregnant people's right to choose. It's still getting into that narrative, and I think it you know, as kind of fairly revolting as I feel it is to say, if we can get hold of that and use that kind of Daily Mail advertising to explain to people, you know, what the dangers are and why abortion is so important, and that it's just the tip of the iceberg, and these are all the attacks that we've had, and this is what the world looks like when there is illegal abortion or no access to it, then that would be really helpful in kind of pushing it so that they're having to fight us rather than we're having to fight them and meet them on their terms. And yeah, I mean, obviously, and then just my final point was about misogynist narratives, which I think I've kind of already gone into, but you know, Stella Creasy has got an initiative to make misogyny a hate crime, and the fact that it's not is just, you know, it kind of speaks volumes, I think. So I think that as well, a shift in terms of those wider conversations would be helpful, specifically for abortion rights.
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to read some comments that are in the chat, because I'm not sure if everyone can see them. But so Jane makes the point that the organisation that used to be called Abort 67, and it's Abort 70. It used to be called Abort 73 in the US. So they've just carried over what they're doing in the US, which is the what is it? Something for bioethical reform, campaign for bioethical reform.
Centre for Bioethical
Reform. So that was always the organisation that was above those organisations anyway. And then they changed the name of Abort 67 to the Centre for Bioethical Reform, which I think means not very much to most people. And apparently they've now, so Jane was pointing out, they've renamed themselves Abolish Abortion. So I think that they're trying to test sort of where they can get in and where they can dodge and weave and hide. So she's pointing out that the US abortion abolitionists, and they want women imprisoned. So she's asking, is this part of a new trend? I think that Pam wrote an answer in the chat, but maybe you should repeat that and sort of go into more detail. And then I just wanted to add, in case we don't have time, that Audrey Brown also is getting kind of passionate in the background, because she was saying it's interesting that although anti-choice campaigns are well resourced, they still make women pay a lot of money to get the so-called abortion reversal pills from them. So they're using it as a slush fund as well, which is kind of disgusting. I think it's I mean, I think Davinia and others already made it clear that they're hypocritical, and they just don't act like they care about fetuses. They don't really act like, they do so many more things about, child poverty and, making having children, breastfeeding, all of the elements, properly educating children and supporting women who work and things like that. That's how they'd act if they really cared. But I just don't think they do. So they are hypocritical, and part of the reason that we set up Christians for Choice, and then another activist wanted to set up Muslims for Choice off the back of it, but it was really around the sort of hijacking of the moral high ground. So they set up this 40 Days for Life during Lent, and just had campaigners outside clinics every day during Lent. And it was a conversation a Catholic friend of mine had, going, that's not very Christian. Like, Lent's supposed to be our time to think about ourselves and make ourselves better. It's not about shaming women. So that's where that group came from, and it's got a sort of cross section of Methodist, different types of denominations, because I think that they just really wanted to say being Christian isn't about being anti-choice, and stop inferring that it is. And like, lots of polling shows that. And Rashida Islam, who set up Muslims for Choice, said the same thing. She just said, like, I don't want people to think that the only Muslims there are anti-choice, because being Muslim spreads across sort of a gamut of political views. And so she wanted to represent sort of her way of her version of faith. But just, sorry, Pam, to go back, just if you could talk about Jane's point about the abolitionists.
Not going to.
But so they're using the slavery narrative.
Yes, exactly. It's the slavery narrative. So, as I mentioned earlier, they are very much positioning themselves as human rights campaigners. This is particularly true of the evangelical campaigns, not so much of the Catholic campaigns, but particularly true of the evangelical campaigns. So to cut a really long story short, they have a Centre of Bioethical Reform. They are see themselves as an education campaign, and their rationale is that slavery was abolished because people saw pictures of slaves and then started to recognise slaves as human beings rather than just being dehumanized entities. And once people saw the pictures of slaves and saw them as human, they ended slavery. They particularly it's a very racist narrative that they adopt, because they're, everything is about William Wilberforce and all the white campaigners. The fact that Black people campaigned and were the first to overturn slavery just doesn't enter the narrative at all. So they see themselves as akin to the abolitionist movement for slavery, and that is why they've adopted that language. I mean, painful, but it is true. And as Kerry was saying, is that the anti-choice movement is a very specific religious ideology, and it's based on the idea that all women are mothers. So it's not that you might want to choose mothers, you're just a mother. And it is very much, as much about so-called saving women it's about ensuring that, you know, sort of women fulfill their divine process, because the other narrative that they are very keen on is that within this ideology, women never choose to have abortions. They're always pressured or coerced to having abortion, because they wouldn't choose to be abortion because that's against God's plan for them. So there must be a reason they have abortion. And just as an aside, I'm just talking to Audrey, I know I'm monopolizing here, but the reason why they might make women pay for abortion reversal pills is that abortion reversal is very much coming out of the US, and most of the anti-choice movement is also very neoliberal in its entity. So and as well as you know, so you can't they don't, and particularly groups like 40 Days for Life, various other people, they don't believe in the welfare state and they don't believe in state healthcare. So there is, with the organisations in particular, it's Heartbeat International that is kind of doing this evangelical kind of global move to provide the abortion reversal pill, but of course, you know, you have to pay for it because you know, state medicine is akin to communism. And very anti-family and anti-Christian. So I don't know if that helps.
Thanks. Polly, do you want to come in on Northern Ireland on anything?
Sure. So the situation in Northern Ireland is that abortion was decriminalised by Westminster, and since then nothing has happened. So there is no provision for abortion in Northern Ireland, essentially. So women are still having to travel over to the United Kingdom. They don't have telemedicine. They never had it, whereas we got it in the rest of the United Kingdom. And it's all round pretty dire. There are a couple of legal challenges. So at the moment, SPUC is challenging whether or not Westminster had the power to decriminalise abortion in Northern Ireland in the first place, and that should be heard, I think, pretty soon this summer. And then the Northern Ireland Human Rights Campaign is also a commission, sorry, is judicially reviewing the Northern Ireland government about its failure to put any provision into place. So so I think they were going to be bound up together and heard together. I think they've been separated now, but those two things will be happening sort of this year. But essentially it's not a great place to be. It's really good that we've got decriminalisation, but as Davinia was saying earlier on, you know, it's meaningless really for the women that are actually experiencing having unwanted pregnancies, because it's great and everything to have the legal power to have a termination, but if you can't actually access it, it doesn't mean anything at all. So women are still travelling over. At least there's funding now, so which there has been since I think 2017. So they're not having to pay so much money as they were previously to travel and to pay privately to have the abortion, but it's still a terrible situation. And obviously, given COVID over the last 18 months, it's kind of unfathomable, really, that we would be forcing people to get on a plane to go to another country to have an abortion that it should be legal or that is legal in their own country. But that's where we kind of are at the moment. So we're sort of, everyone's kind of keeping their fingers crossed that things will start to flesh out over the next year, but we've sort of been hoping that for since 2018 as well. So
yeah, I think that's really, like the access as well as the legal rights is important. I think I was going to make a point, and then I was going to ask all of the speakers to sort of wrap up for the last bit. So if you want to prepare sort of a minute summary, I just wanted to make a point about joining abortion rights, making sure that you're kind of linking in with what we're doing, and also engaging, you know, joining in with the activity and finding out what's going on. So we have, if you join, you get automatically signed up to our newsletter, but there's also a sign up. We want to get it out to as many people, so forward it on and get more people to read our weekly newsletter, and there'll be a link to sign up to it. But I think that, as Pam alluded to earlier, silence is also an anti-choice narrative. Shutting people out of the debate is something that they enjoy doing, and it makes it a lot easier. So they either don't let pro-choice stories sort of in the media, and they do that by making it very controversial. I mean, like, the amount of times, if I had £1 for every journalist that's introduced me as like controversial or something, I mean, it's not controversial. 1 in 3 women will have an abortion in their lifetime. So how can something that a third of people, you know, third of women do, be a controversial act? It's healthcare. I think that we should be really clear about that. But what an anti-choice narrative is to marginalize my view and most of our views in society, so that we're only talked about in ethical debates, or in a kind of not a real situation, you know, a hypothetical scenario, not like what happens to real women when they don't have access to choice. We know what happens. They end up in A&E. That's what happened pre-67 when it wasn't legal. That's what happens in other countries where they don't have safe access to abortion. And so I think that we need to at least learn that lesson and make sure that we're not silent, and make sure that we are explaining that abortion is still criminalized, that we need decriminalization, what decriminalization is, and who will benefit from it. And the consultation on telemedicine, we did quite a lot of work to make all of those arguments, and those are the things that we need to kind of tell people. Yes, it was a whole consultation built for the antis to have their say, but we still have the science. We have more and more studies that have come out to show how telemedicine improves abortion care. Women and pregnant people can get it quicker, and it also makes it more accessible for a much wider group of people, and something that we've talked about in the summer school series, particularly in cases of intimate partner violence, I think is really powerful. So I think we should talk about that more, and I think it can't just be me. It has to be grassroots. It has to be all of us, with all of our different voices and all of our different ways of expressing things. I think that we need to push that sort of broad narrative out. So I'm gonna let people. We've put the links to the things I was talking about in the chat, but I think if I take it backwards, Dav, are you okay to round up?
Yes. So I have a confession to make. Right up until I was 17, I was anti-choice. I grew up in an anti-choice country. I was educated in that way. And I also believed that, you know, abortion was murder and these women were harlots or whatever it was. And I mean, for me, what changed my mind was realizing that abortion is just a reality. It doesn't matter what you believe about it. It doesn't matter what you think about abortion. It exists. And so your only opinion really should be about whether you want people to be able to access it safely or not. That's it. Once I wrapped my head around that idea, it was like the light bulb went on. I was like, oh wow, okay, I get it. And so when we were researching for the play, because most of the people we interviewed were Maltese, that was one of the questions we asked them. You know, were you always pro-choice? What changed it for you? And there was a variety of answers. Some of them were like me. It was the realization that, oh well, it doesn't matter if you ban it because it won't change it. But there was also a lot about, I had a conversation with a friend who like turned me around to it, or I met somebody, or I knew somebody who had an abortion, or I needed an abortion. And then I realized that, you know, it was something real, something that happened to everyday people like myself. So I just want to say that it's just really important that we have these conversations, that we don't let the discourse be dominated by the antis, because they are there and they have an incredible amount of energy for it. Like, they're very persistent and they will be there to catch the people who just are on the fence and they don't know. I also want to say that it's really important that you do join abortion rights and encourage your friends to do the same, because a lot of the people I meet in this country who are from this country don't know about the laws of this country when it comes to abortion. And that's a problem. And it's a problem that there's a growing anti-choice movement. And we've seen from other countries how easy it is for our rights to be taken away from us. It takes one far-right government to be in power to roll back legislation. And then what? And then they're bolstered by this growing kind of anti-movement. So if you haven't already joined, please do join, and please encourage your friends to do the same. We have a lot of work to do. Our work is definitely not over. Thank you.
Thanks. Pam, you got a summary?
Yeah, so I just like to echo everything what was said. Really, we need to have more conversations with abortion. We need to challenge this idea that abortion is controversial. I'm sick and tired of this idea that, you know, it's like climate change used to be, right? You know, well, climate change, we'll have a nice scientist on this, you know, talking about real serious issues, and we'll get some person with a website on to go, climate change doesn't exist, in the name of balance. It's not balance when you get an extremist who doesn't actually, you know, on the other end. That's not balance at all. And I think it's very difficult, but we need to try and challenge that narrative that every time there's an abortion story, they get someone, you know, to pop up and put the other side. And that's also a way about how they reinforce some of the mythologies that are not true. And again, it's, you know, it's not difficult to see how easy it is to you know, to you know, again, as already been said, to go backwards. I mean, I bet many of the people, you know, who know anything about Poland today would be shocked to know that women used to travel to Poland to get abortions, right? Prior to the 1967 Abortion Act. Actually, Poland was the destination to travel to get abortions for many women across Europe. Because they were one of a number of countries that gave access to abortion first, and now, unfortunately, it's the other way around. So we need to be better, and please don't be afraid to have conversations about abortion. So one of the things that I've done for a number of years now, whenever the opportunity arises, is to have very loud conversations on buses and trains, right, where you kind of, it's great if you know, it's great if you're talking to someone next to you, but you can also get your phone out and just be pretending if you are brave enough to do so. And then you can explain to a whole carriage or half a bus that abortion is still a crime and how stupid that is, because most people don't know. And, you know, you do get some funny looks, but it's actually worthwhile because we need to get that message across. You know, we are the pro-choice majority. We live in a pro-choice country. Let's be proud of that, and let's just get everyone to go, yeah, well, of course this isn't an issue, and push back as much as we can.
Thank you. Thank you. Polly.
Yeah, I actually don't have really anything to say other than what's already been said, but I would say it's about trying to bring everything back to women and pregnant people's actual lived experiences, because that is not what is being said by the anti-choice faction. You know, that, yeah, they work in hypotheticals and in a judgment, basically, and not in the real world. And the reason that the millions, you know, the vast number of huge reasons that a woman or a pregnant person might decide that she doesn't want to continue with the pregnancy, you know, and none of which are unvalid. So I think, yeah, exactly, having those conversations and just bringing it back to that whenever the conversation goes anywhere, just bring it back to, like, what's the actual lived experience. So what I would also just like to say is that, so Sister Supporter, we're based in London, but we've got other little organisations, satellite organisations outside of London. And if anyone is either in London or outside and would like to get involved or would like to set up their own Sister Supporter, if you've noticed anti-choice harassment outside your clinic, please get in touch. We're on Twitter at Sister Supporter, or you can go on our website, which is www.sistersupporter.co.uk, and I'll put it in the chat. And then, as well as that, but sort of slightly outside of that, we have a hotline, which we ask people to send pictures or videos or audio or just text of what you see outside clinics. So you can just send a WhatsApp message to this number and say the location where you are, obviously. And that way we're just collating as much evidence as we can to get more of a picture of the country, and also to know where we need to specifically try and set up Sister Supporter franchises. So I will pop that in the chat now. And thanks very much.
Thanks for doing that. Yeah, we've highlighted that in the newsletter as well. So great. Thanks very much, all of you. If you can stay on for just a few more minutes, I just wanted to thanks for being part of the final Abortion Summer School series. It's the second year we've done it, and I feel like it's getting so much kind of tighter and stronger, and the quality of the experts and the specialists have been excellent across the board. And I think abortion rights is really grateful that we can have such a great cadre of people who are working really hard in lots of areas. We started off the month talking about intimate partner violence, and it was a real, like, while we're in lockdown, I think it's a really shocking but really pointed example of why we need telemedicine and abortion care. And Audrey was on the panel, and I was actually quite moved by how just ordinary medical healthcare professionals are working so hard and are finding different ways of reaching out to people, you know, meeting them in supermarket car parks to pass on the pills, and making sure that poorer women have extra sanitary protection and things that they need that aren't budgeted for and aren't included in our healthcare system. I think that, you know, those things are really powerful. We chose these sessions so we could talk about key issues. The next section specifically talked about abortion poverty, and it's something that we can't ignore. I think we've always known that rich women have been able to work out legal ways of getting abortions even pre-67. In Ireland, richer women are ones that are able to travel at a moment's notice. They don't have to save up. They don't have to worry about childcare or plane tickets, things like that. So I think that it's sort of the harsh end of why we have to campaign for everyone, for the most vulnerable, and how that lifts us all up, how we can't leave people behind. The third session was an all-Black session looking at going beyond choice, and, you know, whether choice exists for all of us, looking at abortion experiences of people of colour, and that was a really powerful discussion. We had somebody from Decolonising Contraception, and it was a real, it was actually for me something that really made me have to relook at everything, look at how we campaign. I mean, obviously we've been trying to make sure we have the broadest voices, but we also have to listen when we're talked to about how abortion affects all of us. That was really that different voices, and making sure that we understood why there is some cynicism around abortion from Black and Asian community, and how they feel like they've been used in the past, and how we need to make sure that we don't discount, you know, the way that they're talking about their experiences. And then this session about anti-choice narratives, and this session is fundamental to how, you know, the discussion we're having is practical, but also philosophical, you know, sort of underpins our philosophy and how we campaign and why we campaign. So I think it's really important to not just always assume that everyone understands why we're doing this, because I think people come at it from different angles and at different levels. And we want everyone to learn along with us, and we also want to learn ourselves. I think it's the whole point of branding this as a summer school. This is something that we consciously need to update our own knowledge base, because it's evolving, and the types of people that are facing it are changing. So that's why we do it. It's the second one we've done. I'm really hoping that we do this next summer, and that we have more people sort of engaging in it. And so if you have ideas about topics, please let us know about them. If you have great speakers you've seen in the past at other events, then please let us know, and we'll get in touch with them. And yeah, joining the campaign is also about shaping the campaign, so get involved in it. Thanks very much, everyone. I'll leave it